Well, I guess I can say this now. The Frontrunner, The Life of Steve Prefontaine, is available for pre-order. And look at that book cover. My goodness. That is hot with 2 T's. You can visit the bookseller of your choice, Powell's, bookshop.org, HarperCollins, Barnes & Noble, and yes, even Amazon, and plunk down $32.99, or maybe even $65.98, or $98.97. Everything helps. Every author you know under the sun begs for pre-orders, and you only have so many dollars at your disposal, so I'll just say, consider it. Hell, if you order 5 or more, email me the receipt, and I'll be sure to do a private book club meeting for you and your gang. Okay, but listen, though. Promotional support for the podcast is brought to you by the Power of Narrative Conference, celebrating its 26th year on the last weekend of March, it being the 28th and the 29th. 300 to 400 journalists from around the world descend on Boston, Massachusetts. Keynote speakers include Susan Orlean, Connie Schultz, and Dan Zach, and they're going to bring the knowledge and the inspiration. Listeners to this podcast can get 15% off their enrollment fee by using the code CNF15, 1515. To learn more, visit combeyond.bu.edu and use that CNF15 code. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be talking. Yeah, your boy B.O.
Do the thing that other reporters are not willing to do.
Hey, it's the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell. I'm Brendan O'Mara. Prepare to die. Jared Sullivan is here. He's the author of Valley Solo, One Lawyer's Fight for Justice in the Wake of America's Great Coal Catastrophe. It's published by Knopf. Jared's book has gotten a prime review in the New York Times and was one of those 4 featured books in a recent issue of the New Yorker. You know, the briefly noted section toward the back. It doesn't matter what issue. What matters is that it was there, man. Jared got his start primarily editing and admired the kinds of writers and reporters who do both very well, like David Remnick. And I'd also throw Daniel Zaleski in there from the New Yorker as well, who's primarily edits people like Patrick Radden Keefe and even David Gran. But his profile on Guillermo del Toro from like 2010 or whenever the fuck it was, it's fucking awesome. Valley Solo, getting back on track. Valley Solo is along the lines of Jonathan Harr's A Civil Action and illustrates the toll that greed and negligence exert on the people exposed to toxins and the costs that cases of this nature take on the legal team, both financial and physical. It's a pretty riveting tale, and it just makes you sad in a lot of places. It makes you angry. It made me very mad. I don't get mad very easily. Jared's work has also appeared in The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Garden and Gun, Men's Journal, and Field and Stream. Yeah, he's all over the place, man. Show notes to this episode more at BrendanO'Mara.com. Hey, there you can find blog posts and sign up for the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter. Links to cool stuff, book raffles, CNF and happy hour. Things that make your writing life a little more fun, damn it. First of the month, no spam, as far as I can tell. You can't beat it. You can also window shop at patreon.com/CNFpod if you want to throw a few bucks into the CNF and coppers. Get a phone call with me to talk some things out. Sometimes you just need to talk it out, man. All right, so Jared is here, and he's going to talk about how he got his start in this writing mess, and how he wrote this book during the pandemic with little kids, and cherishing every spare moment he could find, how excited he was to assign work to other writers when he was an editor, especially at Men's Journal, learning from the likes of Nick Baumgarten and Devin Young. And stay tuned for a parting shot on being able to stay in the game. Hey, did you know my blood pressure the other day, my reading was like 144/105? Is that high? Am I gonna die? Here's Jared. Riff.
I want to just tell you a little bit how I got to I'll just kind of take you from the beginning, if that's okay, if you don't mind. I went to school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I did not know how people made their way in journalism. I didn't know any really practicing journalists, especially magazine journalists. So I think like a lot of people, I finished college and thought I was going to write like the next great American novel. So, but I realized I needed a job. So I got a job for a tiny book publisher in Nashville, editing books about antique firearms of all things. It was incredibly not glamorous. I worked on the strip mall next to the highway. You could hear semi trucks buzz by all day. But then around this time, I started reading some of the magazine greats, the Nick Baumgartens, the John Jeremiah Sullivans, those sorts of folks. And then I quickly was like, oh, this is actually what I love. So I worked in Nashville, worked for a year in Columbia, South Carolina, as a small outdoors magazine, and I didn't really have like an in New York. I ended up writing for this outdoor magazine basically because I grew up in Nashville and I grew up hunting and fishing with my dad. I was not like a pro at it or anything, but I enjoyed it enough. So once I got this small outdoors magazine in Columbia, South Carolina, it's called Sporting Classics. Like, okay, I want to get to New York City. There's a big outdoors magazine in New York. It's Field and Stream. It's a legendary publication, and they hired me, and I moved up there in 2015. And Field and Stream it's a magazine that people in New York media circles don't pay attention to at all, hardly. But it was a great training ground for me as a young editor slash writer. I got to do a lot of, at a pretty young age, I guess, 25, I was getting to write some fun, long, like survival stories, like people get lost in the woods. And those are actually really fun stories to tell because you get people on the phone or you go visit them and kind of reconstruct what happened to them. And I mean, I learned lessons doing that I used in writing my new book, Valley Solo. So it was a great experience, and the editors there are like mean and hard in like a good way, right? And so I just learned a tremendous amount from them. And gosh, that changed my life, like moving to New York for Field and Stream. And it has a great, probably people probably think it's like a redneck magazine. It probably is to an extent, but it was founded by not by Teddy Roosevelt, by some of his buddies. So it actually has a very long history of like really solid, great, important conservation writing. So that's really what I focused on there was conservation in the environment, and that's still I feel like kind of what I'm covering like to this day with my book. So when I was at Field and Stream, though, I kind of realized like, I liked going on all these fun trips to write. I went to Alaska, went to New Mexico, all over North America. But I didn't want to just write about the outdoors. I wanted to do other things. So in 20, gosh, when was it? 2017. Oh, let me back up. But in 2016, I had a huge break, and this is when I feel like this kind of like put me on the trajectory. I've still I'm still benefiting from this lucky break. All these years later. When I was at Field and Stream, USA Today, they produce a once a year like hunting magazine, and they asked me to write a piece for it. I was not thrilled to do it. It was about this TV personality. She has some show on TV, and so I was like, whatever, I'll do it. I went and I interviewed her on the phone, wrote a short little piece that USA Today ran this in the sports page. My big break this was in 2016, and in the run up to the during the and I guess run up to the election when Trump was trying to secure the presidential, the Republican nomination. His camp, I guess, reached out to me because they wanted some coverage in USA Today ahead of, I think it was the Iowa caucus in 2016. I did not want to write for, no offense to anyone who works at USA Today. I did not want to. It was not a great experience. But I was like, what if I did a talk of the town piece for the New Yorker? And they took they actually wanted me to write about Donald Trump Jr. because he's an outdoorsman, not about Donald Trump. But they had the camp. I guess the team approached me. Do you want to write about Donald Trump Jr.? And like I said, I said, what about the New Yorker? They took a day or two to think about it, and they got back to me. And they're like, okay, we'll try it. So I emailed the New Yorker cold. I emailed Lizzie Whitcomb, who's longtime Talk of the Town, I guess deputy editor of Talk of the Town, and she responded to me in like 5 minutes or something. I think I sent the email, then got to get a drink of water or go to the bathroom. I came back, and she was like, "Yes, when can you do it?" and I think I went white. I did not. I had never really reported a story for any big publication, and so that was my real break. So I took a sick day the next day and went to Trump Tower, met Donald Trump Jr. in his office, and like Paul Manafort was there, and all these people who had become so infamous in American life. And at this time, it was still like the whole Trump campaign was like a total lark. Like I didn't. I mean, I didn't think they would win. I don't think anyone really thought they would win. It's bizarre. They have a beautiful office that overlooks Central Park, and I feel like I was kind of like a hick from the sticks that had just moved to New York like a year, not even a year earlier, I think. All of a sudden, I was on assignment for the New Yorker in the Trump Tower. It was a I had like some cheap suit I bought. I'm sure I bought like J.C. Penney's or something on. Totally out of my league. I think I had it overnight, like a recorder. I'm not sure if I even owned like a handheld recorder yet to do the interview. I think I had to buy it overnight on Amazon. Anyways, so Donald Trump and Jr. and I, we walked around Central Park and we talked about the outdoors for an hour or so. I came back and then I stayed up until 3 or 4 in the morning drafting a talk of the town piece. I filed it. Then by lunchtime the next day, they had like totally edited it, and they did some rewriting. My draft was not perfect, but a lot like the soul of it was still there, which made me happy. Right, like a lot of my original lines were still there. So yeah, that was kind of like my big break writing for the New Yorker. Then from there, I got an agent, and I was a literary agent, and then I kind of used that piece and some other follow up pieces I wrote for the New Yorker's website to get a job as a features editor at Men's Journal, and it's all kind of snowballed from there. So I feel very, very fortunate. It was kind of a weird, weird lucky break to go from outdoors writer to I guess doing all the things I'm doing now. So
Did the talk of the town piece, did an editor agent reach out to you, or were you able to kind of pitch that to an agent and you're like, hey, I'm looking for a representation for some unknown book down the road or something?
no, it's crazy. I don't know this for a fact, but every time I've only written four little pieces for the New Yorker's website. But almost every time I've written for them, those handful of times, an agent has approached me like out of the blue. It's like, hey, are you represented? Yeah. Do you any interest in doing a book? So I have the suspicion that literary agents probably just haunt the New Yorker's website looking for new bylines and kind of use that as a way to find new talent, because I had very few clips when agents started approaching me. I'd done maybe one feature for Field and Stream and some front of the book stuff and this one talk of the town story, and that was kind of it. So yeah, lucky break indeed.
Yeah, I know when, whatever it was, 12, what year is it now? Yes, like, 12, 14-ish years ago is when I was like really trying to get some traction in feature writing and freelance
Sure,
journalism
sure.
to no avail. And I was just like totally bitter and resentful and frustrated. I just didn't know. It's like you just don't know how to even get a start and make those kind of connections. And it sounds like, for you there is, if you're focusing on the work enough, you give the opportunity for luck to strike. And I was often too focused on just what other people seemed to have around me, and like I was just so mired in my own funk that I just couldn't kind of get out of my own head and just like kind of focus on my own running my own race. And just for people who might be similarly frustrated, what might you say to people like that who are looking for that, to get that traction, be it a lucky break or just through sheer force of will?
Yeah, okay. There's a lot to unpack in what you just said, and I felt similarly. It is really hard. I always focused on the writing. Like there's some writers. I don't have a huge like Twitter or social media following,
Yeah, me
and I
neither.
wish I wish I did now while I'm promoting a book. I'm like, gosh, it'd be really handy to have like 100,000 Twitter followers. I could promote this book to, but I always just focused on the writing, and okay, so I'm a kid, public high school kid, public college kid from Tennessee. I got hired to move to Field. I got hired at Field and Stream to work in New York City. And I kind of felt like I had to make it work. I just got married 6 months earlier, and it was a very hard transition from getting married, then 6 months later moving to New York City with my new wife, and it was very, very, very hard. But again, I was like, I have to make this work. So I just wrote as much as I could. I was also, while I was a full-time editor at Field and Stream, also doing short pieces for Outside. Also, like I said, I started doing these little pieces for the New Yorker through this lucky break. But I was kind of saying yes to everything, no matter how unglamorous it seemed at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was not super thrilled. I mentioned that I for USA Today I profiled this sportswoman, who had a reality TV show. That was not it. That was like not my dream assignment, right? I wanted to do cool profiles or cool narratives, but I just did. I said yes to everything for a long, long time. I feel like that's kind of what it takes, and that yeah, and you just hope something catches and something works out. I've been fortunate that a few things have worked out, and I've been able to build on build on writing for the New Yorker, build on. I wrote some features, and I wrote a feature for Men's Journal that I expanded into my book. So I guess it's just doing a lot and hoping a few things work out, right? And just
Yeah.
trust. I also like just trust that they will work out. I don't know. That's probably naive advice. I wouldn't want to steer someone in the wrong direction. There probably is a point where it could be wise to throw up your hands and say, I'm going to try something else now. But I was just always just pretty hard headed about it. Say, I'm just going to keep doing it and doing it and doing it and trust that I'm I'm decently smart. I get, something's going to work out eventually. So yeah, I guess I'll say like it's not a zero sum game. It can feel like a zero sum game media
Yeah, for
sometimes when
sure.
these people are. I remember like back in like 2020, I guess when was it 2016? Like everyone who like worked for like BuzzFeed or whatnot or Gawker were like the cool kids in the Twitter universe,
You're right.
and but then like where are those people now? I don't know. I also say like I said, I've really made my career as an editor, and I really do like editing. It's very, very fun. I of course will not mention any names, but some of the people with the largest Twitter followers are not the best writers that by
Mm-hmm.
any stretch of the imagination. That's not to say if you have a large Twitter following, you are a bad writer, but the correlation is pretty weak. But I'll also say some big name writers are big name for a reason too. David Sedaris doesn't have a large Twitter following, but I edited a story by an essay by him once, and his drafts come in like almost near perfect.
Mm.
They're very him, right? Like they're very much a Dave Sedaris essay, but I know people have maybe mixed feelings about him, but I think he's famous for a reason. He turns in very, very clean, well thought out stories. So anyways, I don't know. I've just always tried to just I guess do my best. I don't know, do the thing I like, and I'm not great at social media, so I just always try to focus on the writing and kind of pour myself into that because that's one thing I do enjoy and am in control of. So yeah, I guess I found in promoting this book, even though I don't have just a monster social media presence, if you work hard, people respect you, and people with monster social media presence will retweet your work or will post about your work. Margaret Rankle, the Times columnist and author, she's a very large platform for the Times, and I think that's translated to a very large social media following. She read my book and posted very, very kind things about it. So I guess to your point, put the work put the work first, and it'll get recognized by your peers. So that's how it's worked for me at least. But what do I know? I'm just a first time author, so
Well, with editing and writing, is just in what ways has the backbone of the editing work you've done translated into your capacity to uh, go to the other side and report and write with skill?
some of it's just like simple language stuff. When you learn, being an editor has taught me what editors look for in stories. Basically, is it
Mm-hmm.
timely? This is basic, but no one really tells you this when you start. Like when you're pitching features, a lot of times you get pitched subjects. Like here's a topic, right? Well, editors, they really want a character that can help lead the reader through a bigger subject, right? I mean, that's every New Yorker story, for instance. It follows one specific person that starts like on such and such day, this happened, and then it kind of goes from there. It's very like they're about people. So, but a lot of young writers don't always understand that. They'll pitch you like, hey, there's this big problem. I want to write about it. Like, okay, that's a subject, but what is the story? You know, who's the character? What happens to them? How are they going to lead the reader through a narrative? And maybe that's pretty basic, but it does. I think that does take a long time for people to understand. And also just simple question like, why are we telling the story right now? You know, that's every editor asks him or herself when they're assigning a story. Why is this important right now? And you kind of have to have a ready defense for that if you're a writer. Some of the other lessons from editing, it's just write clear, simple sentences, avoid cheap tricks. I always get annoyed when like books start with like the most, or stories even, they start with the most dramatic, compelling scene right in the first sentence, and then like they jump back in time. It's like, okay, here's all the boring stuff. Then they lead you back to that moment of climax. I always find that move just predictable and boring. So being an editor, you just get your hands on a lot of copy. You get to see what people's moves are, and that's the move I just described is one I am very bored of.
I think it might be, I forget if it's Stephen Pressfield or Julia Cameron who talks about uh, shadow careers, and I feel like editing can be a shadow career for people who really want to. It might be blocked writers or they want to write, but they're in the editing side and they have a hard time breaking through that firewall. And how did you avoid that pitfall?
Pitfall of what, being stuck as just as an editor.
Yeah, yeah, and then as a result, maybe just getting kind of like bitter, like, oh, I want to do this. I'm seeing all these people do the thing I want to do, but here I am stuck editing. Not that editing's a bad thing, but you might have wanted to always be like have the byline out there, be more platformed or forefronted. But it seems like you've struck a really good balance there.
Yeah, I've always worked for like dying magazines where if I've raised my hand to write an assignment, you know, I'll get paid more for writing for whatever magazines I've worked for. Typically, right? They don't pay me extra to write. So if I raise my hand to write something, usually people say, "Okay, fine. That just helps our budget if you write things." So I've never really had a problem getting stories okay to run with where I've worked. And you know, I guess I've worked for Field and Stream, Men's Journal. That I've freelanced a bunch of different places. As far but I also like love editing. It's fun. It's really fun to work with great writers and get
Mm-hmm.
inside their brain and see what they. I mean, there's nothing to me more fun than someone pitches you a great story idea that has a clear character, a compelling subject that you know is just like so right for your audience. Then getting the editor in chief or whoever it is to give you the money to fly that person to some like far flung place and bring back a story that is everything you hope it to be or close to it. You know, it's compelling and dynamic. I just love doing that. Like I love sitting writers places and basically saying, you know, go find some treasure for me and bring it back. In
Mm-hmm.
creating literature out of trying to create something akin to literature, I guess, out of real life. It's just always a thrill to me. It's never not fun sending someone's to some far flung place or to hang out with some interesting person, whether it's Greg Daniels from The Office or Bill McKibben or I'm trying to think other profiles I've assigned. John Prine, I signed a John Prine profile to Rick Bass. Oh, I sent Devin Gordon to profile the manager of the Mets. I sent a guy, a Matthew Brimner, to Mexico to hang out with this poor father who was looking for mass graves left by the cartel. You know, I guess the cartel would disappear these people and leave the bodies in these mass graves. So I sent Matthew Brimner. It was his idea. He brought it to me. I got the funds to send him to Mexico to go hang out with this poor father who was looking around the rural countryside trying to find his son among these mass graves. I mean, you get a story like that. That is such a compelling, heavy story. And this is from Men's Journal. It is just so thrilling to see what writers come back with when you send them to a place like that. And it's never not interesting. I also sent the same writer, Matthew Brimner, to Peru to write about this this guy from Canada, ayahuasca shaman, self-proclaimed shaman who went to Peru to study ayahuasca with some some tribe, and shit went down. He ended up getting murdered, and I sent Matthew to this small village to write about what happened, and he came back with this very very compelling portrait of like the ayahuasca trade in Peru. I mean, it is. I get a thrill out of that every time. So, and I learn from people. I love seeing how they take the raw material of research and reporting and weave it into a compelling narrative. So I feel like having my hands in all these different writers' copies, whether it's Anna Peel or Nick Baumgarten or Mia Mercado, different people. I've learned their tricks, and I steal the best ones of them. I've tried to steal the best ones of them and use them in my own pieces.
Yeah, that was my follow up to this is that having access and collaborating with such skilled reporters and writers, it's a what from their bag of tricks have you most utilized when in your own reporting, in your own writing?
That's a great question. This is a small. Devin Gordon, he was a longtime GQ top editor. I forget what his exact title was. When he left GQ, when I was at Men's Journal, I wanted to compete with GQ and Esquire, right? I kind of thought maybe we could go toe to toe with them. Men's Journal, I feel like has always been like the number three men's magazine, but kind of behind those two giants.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I mean all those magazines, in my view, are kind of sorry shapes now, unfortunately. But this is back in 2017 through 2019, I guess, when I was at Men's Journal. I was trying to make Men's Journal, working in collaboration with my colleagues, of course, make it a little more general interest and a little less like outside. So I brought in Devin Gordon to write a monthly sports column and also do sports features for us. And I sent him to profile. It was his idea. I got the green light to send him to profile a star slugger for the Mets, something I was not inherently interested in. Right. Well, Devin went to this photo shoot in some like banquet hall in somewhere deep in Brooklyn. And athletes are not known for being very very quotable, right? And that's why a lot of sports, in my view, some sports features are pretty dry. And also, you don't get much access to athletes a lot of times. But Devin, instead of just like quoting him, he did quote him, but he also just like paraphrased this slugger's quote in a way that was like 1,000 times more interesting than the words that would have actually come out of the guy's mouth, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
instead of doing direct quotes, he was just like Devin was just like, I can't remember the hitter's name, whatever it was. He just like paraphrased what he was saying in a way that was so funny and so sharp. Like that's a great move. Like no one says you have to direct quote a profile subject like the whole time, right? You can paraphrase
Yeah.
and be smart and funny. And you kind of have the license to do that. Obviously you don't want to put words in people's mouth. You don't want to certainly not invent things ever. But that was really helpful for me when I was writing my book about law. My book Valley So Low, it's a law book. Well, I there's a lot of like long ass depositions and court trials that I had to summarize very succinctly. I realized, oh yeah, I don't have to like direct quote. I can just like paraphrase the general idea of what these 10 pages of documents tell me in a couple like few kind of quick, I'm not gonna say fun sentences, but I can kind of distill that down and kind of say it in a way that's kind of sharp and fun. So I guess I kind of used Devin kind of influenced you in a small way in that regards. I'm trying to think what else. I mean, I forget who was John Bennett. He was a longtime New York. I did not work with him, but he was a longtime New Yorker features editor. I read some tips that he gave. Maybe it was an interview or something. It went along the lines of like just tell the story from start to finish. Like don't be too flashy. Just like give the reader the story straight. Use simple, clear language, and just trust that you have a good story. And I've tried to basically follow that advice.
I know in my many rewrites and revisions of this biography I have coming out, like my early on, I had far too many quotes pulled out from whatever sources I had
Mm.
called. And my editor, who's just been so committed, like I won the lottery with my editor, and it'll break my heart to never work with him again. I hope I'll be able to, but that's not never a guarantee. But he did say, he's like, listen, this thing, like, you can put this in your own words, and you still cite it where you got the information from, but you don't have to use them. You can, like, the reader needs you to tell them what's important in there. You need to be in the driver's seat. And so by you paraphrasing certain things, that means the one when you do actually quote someone, it really stands out. That degree of agency and authority is on the writer. Instead of outsourcing all the quoted material to other people, like, you take on the agency of that information. And that was such a valuable lesson I learned in just the writing of my own book from just a few months ago.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. So, I have a great agent, Elise Cheney, and she has, I guess, her sub agent Alice. When we were going over my book proposal, I had a very similar thing where I was probably over quoting the subject of my book, and I wanted my book to read like I guess you call it like a nonfiction novel. I wanted to read like, I guess read like a novel like Hiroshima, or what's another example, A Civil Action by Jonathan Harr.
Yeah.
And if you're letting the characters tell the story through quotes, you're really not doing your job. In my book, I only quote characters when they're like talking to each other in scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have any reaction quotes really I can think of. I don't have quotes that move the narrative forward. It's only like in scene, and I think that's given. I like to think that that helps my book feel more like a novel, because that's how novelists treat their quotes, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it would be so weird in a novel to be like, here's the scene, and then here's someone who's just like, this is how I felt about this particular scene.
Yeah,
And
exactly, exactly.
yeah, it makes no sense in fiction. So yeah, when you're doing narrative nonfiction, and the best narrative nonfiction reads like fiction. And so yeah, you have to have the confidence to narrate the story yourself, and then, which means a lot of your reporting, a lot of, maybe even a lot of interviews, they're not necessarily attributed, even if they might be cited, because it's all there for information. So it might not be so and so said. It's just like the essence of what they said is there based on your reporting, but it's not a direct quote.
Exactly, exactly. And a lot of young writers don't always realize that, especially if you get your start in a news background, whether it's online or like an actual real newspaper, which I know there are few and far between of those. Those are quote heavy. Those are quote heavy operations, right? You're trying to scramble to get stories up. You you rely heavily on quotes, but yeah, with long form feature writing, whether it's book or for a magazine, yeah, try to pull back a little bit and only use the absolute quotes that are just perfect. That just you have to have them there. Taffy Burdesser Ackner does a great job of this too. She has these long celebrity profiles, but she doesn't really quote her subjects that often. But the quotes that are in there are like the chef's kiss quotes, the absolute perfect quotes. So Taffy's a master in a lot of ways, but she's definitely a master of that too.
Nice. And in the reporting for Valley Solo, as you're, as the story, comes to you and you really start to lean into it, and you're starting to start your reporting and you're making those phone calls. What's always hard, and I think what goes unmentioned a lot, is the constant, almost like salesmanship that you have to like two people you want to get information from. And how did you just get on the phone or emails and make that pitch over and over again in a climate where people are very suspicious of journalists, and you have to earn their trust over and over and over again? So how did you navigate that?
Yes, that's a great question. So just I'll give you a little summary of the book real fast. It's in 2008. There's a power plant outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, and they had this 84-acre, six-story tall mound of coal ash in it, which is kind of like a sooty byproduct of when you burn coal to produce electricity. And it collapsed in the middle of the night, and covered 300 acres. 900 men and women from across the country came to help clean this stuff up. Well, jump forward a few years, they start getting really sick. It turns out they weren't given dust masks. Very few of them were given dust masks or respirators when they're on the job site. So my book follows this attorney, Jim Scott. He's kind of I've described him as like a good-hearted knucklehead. He almost reminds me of like Huck Finn a little bit. Like he means very well, but like makes some mistakes, but has like a good heart deep down, right? And he works in this little office strip mall in Knoxville, Tennessee, on a very ugly road, and he shows up to meetings wearing white athletic socks and sends emails to opposing counsel like riddled with typos. He's a great character, right? So I found this story just by reading when I was in worked for Men's Journal. My job was to assign stories to writers to go do, right. And there's not just tons and tons of Southerners in New York City newsrooms. So I try to pay extra close attention to the South. It's where I'm from. I'm from from Nashville. So I saw that there's this big trial around this disaster and these sick workers, and I was like, "There's no like I this is my kind of story. I'm from the state of Tennessee. It's a high stakes story. TVA is the power company, and that has a really interesting history. It's created part of the New Deal. It's kind of like a FDR's brainchild, and it did a lot of good to help lift this region out of poverty. So there's some cool history that fascinated me. So I basically got the lawyers on the phone, and they said, "Come on down. We'll talk to you." And the sick workers. My book follows some of these workers. They were, I think, naturally inclined to speak with me because they wanted their story to be told, and that's like a good lesson. Like what people do, yes, people distrust the media, but at the end of the day, if a reporter shows up and you're in a desperate situation, people want to talk. In a lot of cases, in my experience, I was listening to an interview somewhere. It was some reporter. He was talking about his boss. His boss asked him to call the families of 9/11 victims like the day after the attack. And at first he protested, but then he got these people on the phone, and to his surprise, his or her, I forget who the reporter was, these families wanted to talk to him and just wanted to keep talking and talking and talking because they wanted their stories told, right? So it can feel I mean, reporting is a very intrusive activity. You're really there's no other context in life where it's appropriate just to call up some random stranger that can tell me about your heartache. But journalism, like you can do that, and it's one of the neat tricks of this profession. So these workers they wanted to talk to me. They really did. It helped, I think, that I'm from the area. I'm from Tennessee. I went to school in East Tennessee. I mentioned I worked for Film Stream, and that I think that maybe bought me some points with them. Right? Yes, I flew down from New York City to report this, but I was also kind of a Tennessee boy at heart. How did I get them to open up to me? Well, then I should say I got laid off from Men's Journal when the pandemic hit. The whole staff got laid off, and I had a 6 month old baby at the time,
Ugh. Oh
and
man.
it was bleak times. And her daycare, I actually got hired quickly at Hearst, like right after I got fired from Men's Journal, but before I could even turn in my like new hire paperwork back to Hearst, they were like, "Oh, never mind. Like this pandemic is real. Like, never mind." So,
Oh
um,
no.
yeah, that was discouraging. So I was like, okay, me and my wife were like, okay, we're gonna fly home to Tennessee, stay with family until this blows over. Then we just never left. We're still here. We ended up buying a house down the street from my parents. But moving back here, Knoxville is only a couple hours down the highway from me, so I got to go. I kind of accepted my unemployment for a year. I did some small magazine assignments, but I really just reported this book. I said I'm gonna give this COVID year and just report the heck out of it. So I called people, also interviewed people in person, safely at a safe distance. Yeah, people were very gracious. People wanted their stories told. People appreciated that I was being so diligent and really trying to get it right. And that's what I've experienced. If you tell a source, I'm just trying to like I need your help. I'm just trying to get it right. Usually people will talk to you. Whenever I leave voicemails for sources, people I'm cold calling, I always say, "Hey, I'm a writer for such and such place. I'm hoping you can help me out with something. Please call me back." Something about "I'm hoping you can help me out with something" almost always gets people to return your call. Like people like to help other people. So that's one little trick. I,
Yeah.
there's this the lawyer for the defense in my book. He did not speak to me, so that was I had to do a ride around basically. So I spent a week on LinkedIn figuring out people who had previously worked for this guy, and that's just a numbers game, right? You figure out who worked for them. I use fastpeoplesearch.com, which is just like some public directory. It's a real low budget website, but it's like a public directory of phone numbers.
It's pretty disturbing what's on, like the
Yeah,
information that's on there.
yeah, and so it's just a numbers game. So you see the numbers that are on there, then you just blow through them. I don't do too much research. I just call people up and say, hey, I'm trying to find out some information about this person, not good or bad. I'm just curious what it's like to work with this person and what you can tell me. I want to get the story right. It's something about that too. When you say, I just want to get the story right, people, I feel like, respond pretty positively to that. So if you do that, I think my odds are pretty good. I got maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 people would speak to me about this defense attorney, and I really enjoyed that whole process of just like working the phones. I guess it made me feel like an old time real reporter or something.
Yeah, I tell you, I few things like will stop me in my tracks than having to make cold calls. I hate it. I'll do anything not to do cold calls. I know I have to, and it's just what you got to do. But my
It's not
God,
pleasant. Yeah,
I hate it.
yeah. So I've always told myself, I just had this scrappy mentality when I moved because of like I didn't go to Ivy League school. I didn't have an internship at Harper's or
Right.
whatever. I have not worked for like prestige. I had not really worked for. I did not come up through like prestige publications, right? And I also know like I'm a good writer. I'm not John Jeremiah Sullivan though, right? I don't. My pros are not that on that level of fireworks. So I always told myself, okay, knowing those things, I can outwork people though. I can out hustle people in my reporting. So I kind of like I will be the person who makes all the cold calls because no one else will. So I've tried to tell myself like do the thing that other reporters are not willing to do, and that means working cold calls and kind of and leaning into that. And I feel like that's my if I have a superhero if I have a superpower as a writer reporter, I feel like that's probably it. Just be like I'm just going to grind through this and dig deeper than other people will to make it for all my other deficiencies as a writer and reporter.
Yeah, that's what I like about having writers on the show that might be in their late 50s or 60s when that kind of their reporting skills predated email
Oh, sure.
and everything, and so they just, even if they might be uncomfortable making calls, it's just such a muscle memory. It's just like, yeah, this is the job. You pick up the phone and you just call all day long. And that's all they do. Like Ian O'Connor, who has a great biography, it just came out on Aaron Rodgers, and he interviewed hundreds of people and wrote the book in like a year's time. It was like deadline biography. I don't know
Wow.
how the hell he did it. And it's just has that reporter mentality. And the thing is, you don't need the pyrotechnics of a John Jeremiah Sullivan if you are great at gathering information, because once you have great information, the story almost writes itself.
That's what I found. Yeah, that's definitely been my experience. And also, like, if you're a younger person, it's like to your advantage that no one really calls anymore. Like, so
Yeah.
if you're the one person who does make phone calls, man, you're like so far ahead than of other people who are just like waiting to hear back from email. Like, also like the element of I guess the thing about phone calls, like the element of surprise is kind of on your side, and a lot of people won't pick up initially. But if you do my little trick where you say, "Hey, I'm writing for such and such. Can you help me out with something?" People call you back a lot of times, and you can just kind of spring your questions on them, really. And people will be honest with you. They may not talk to you forever, but they may say something.
And what struck me about Valley So Low also, aside from the physical cost that it took on a lot of the workers who suffered just terrible illnesses as a result of being in and around fly ash and coal ash, was also just the personal and physical costs that, say, the attorneys underwent the whole time as personal injury lawyers who don't take fees until a settlement is there, and they're working for years and years and years, accruing hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just incredible cost to their personal lives as well. And you document this really well with Jim Scott and how his life just kind of unraveled throughout this whole case. So just to what extent was that just on the forefront of your mind, just to show the totality of the cost of this disaster?
That's a great question. So I think this goes back to what your question about what I learned from being an editor. One thing I learned is that you need characters who are at the center of the action and moving the plot forward. And these workers, they're very, I go into great detail about their lives in the book, but at the end of the day, they worked hard and they got sick. They weren't the narrative engines moving the story forward. That's really why I landed on Jim Scott, because he was like kind of the active participant in moving this lawsuit forward. And also, I looked at things like Aaron Brockovich. People love that story. They can't tell you what chemical it was that made all those people sick in California, but they remember Aaron Brockovich. Same thing with Civil Action. Great book by Jonathan Harr and a so-so movie with John Travolta. But that lawyer in that book is also compelling. People remember him. John Grisham prints money, writing law thrillers. So part of me is like, people. I know people like these kind of stories, so I'm gonna do something similar and hope in doing so I can get them to care about this big disaster in coal ash, this toxic waste that sickened all these workers. So that was kind of like a what do you call it, a narrative decision from the beginning. And Jim just ended up being, you never really want to be the subject of a book, because if you're the subject of a book, it means something terribly wrong has has gone something terribly wrong has happened to you in most cases. And Jim, God bless him, he had a lot of stuff go wrong. He took the yeah he, like you said, he took this case for no fee. He took on basically he wouldn't get paid unless they won, and he wrecked his whole life. He went through a horrible divorce. He worked way too hard. He ended up having some stress related health issues that almost killed him. I don't want to be too specific, but because it's to give away stuff. But yeah, it's a brutal process how these environmental cases are handled. The courts have to space how we decide environmental policy in this country is very messed up. The EPA, I think, has been undercut by Congress and by the courts. How we make environmental policies through lawsuits, and that means people like these sick Kingston workers have to, in many cases, wait decades as they kind of fight to prove that a chemical or whatever it is has harmed them. There's a lot of parallels between the sick workers I write about and also the Exxon Valdez plaintiffs. Big oil spill back in the late 80s. It's a very similar story. Exxon spewed a bunch of oil into this fishery in Alaska, wrecked these commercial fishermen's livelihoods, and they had to wait more than a decade to get any semblance of recovery of money for the damage that Exxon caused them. It is just a brutal process. And with the Exxon Valdez case, I know there's been studies or newspaper reports about how most of those plaintiffs involved in that case wish they would have stayed away, wish they would never got involved. I have a suspicion that many of the Kingston workers I write about in my book feel similarly. They end up getting some money at the very end. Spoiler, but in my view, far south of what they actually deserve. So.
Well, yeah, what your book painfully illustrates is how these exploitative industries will just, with almost unlimited resources, can just drag it out until everyone just has to kind of give up and settle to get anything. And then little lesson is learned or little, they're not held to as high account as they should. And then, business as usual just keeps on going on, and they'll just drag you out until you give up, which is just an injustice that is so gross to the people who are on the ground and just used.
Yeah, so my book concentrates on this contractor of TVA called Jacobs Engineering, who I should say disputes like most of my book and takes great issue with my book. So there's that. But they're a publicly traded company, and if you're a publicly traded company, you have to disclose to shareholders lawsuits against you. So in an SEC filing, I found they basically say there's this lawsuit against us, but it will have no material impact on our business or cash flows. It was something to that effect. Basically meaning like this case doesn't really matter to us. Yes, we made hundreds of people sick. Workers, dozens of workers have died after working on this at this disaster site. But at the end of the day, these lawsuits against us don't really matter. So Yes, I find it very, very bleak. I feel like we as a country can do better from this, do better than this. I like to think that we as a country should not tolerate this sort of behavior. We should demand more from industry.
Yeah, well, and what is the reasoning behind not giving the workers the protective equipment is they didn't want the public to see how disastrous it could be or harmful. It's like if we give our workers masks or hazmat suits, it's going to cause this public uproar. So we're gonna we're gonna make these expendable workers. We're gonna we'll basically just put them under chemical threat, just so we can avoid a public outcry, which is all the more tragic.
Yeah, that was definitely part of it. I think also part of it was if they gave these workers dust mask or hazmat suits, they would need more breaks. 'Cause Tennessee is very, very hot in the summer, right? So OSHA, the federal agency, worker safety agency, they have guidelines on how long you can work in the heat wearing protective equipment. So I think if these workers had protective equipment, they would need more breaks. That would slow out the project down. TVA and was under the gun to get all this coal sludge cleaned up fast. So they had a lot of incentive not to give these workers, not to protect them, basically.
And with respect to the totality of your reporting and the
Mm-hmm.
court transcripts and all of that stuff, how did you just keep all that stuff straight? So when it came time to write, you were like, okay, I can start to knock this out.
That's a great question. I'll never forget. So I'm not a terribly organized person.
Yeah,
Knopf
me
asked me to
neither.
do, yeah, Knopf asked me to do like a desk photo for like their Instagram page. They want me to take a picture of my desk, like what my work, and write a little captions about it. And I'm like, y'all do not want to see my like. It is like I have 3 jugs of water next to my desk in case there's my water goes out. I have like my kids' art projects. I mean, it's just junky. I'm not a terribly organized person, but I had to learn how to be terribly organized for this book's sake, right? I'll never forget where I was. I was with a fellow journalist. I was at the Trader Joe's on Court Street in Brooklyn, which any New York person would know. We were pushing the groceries down the aisle. I was trying to explain to her. Her name is Hannah Margaret Allen. She's a longtime journalist. I was trying to deal with all this material, and she's basically like, "Here's how you do it. You create a Word doc for each topic you're going to write about. Whether it's in my case, it was like getting sick on the job. Create a Word doc. For each character, create a Word doc. One of my characters is a guy named Ansel, so I create a Word doc for him. You kind of go down the line and create one for each subject you know you're going to hit at some point in your reporting, right? I created a Word doc and also like a corresponding folder so I could save material. So then as you're reading through transcripts, you're reading through research, you basically take the best bits from whatever you find. You drop that into that Word doc, whatever the topic is, right? And you cite your source clearly with the chunk of text that you found. So then when it comes time to write, in my case, I had a Word doc about the day this big mountain of sludge basically exploded over the landscape. I had like a 50-page Word document by that point after years of reporting and research. So when it's time to write, I just pulled up that Word doc and all my information was in one place. And I basically just wove it together. And I use Google Docs. I know people use Scrivener, some other things. I would just use footnotes in Google Docs for my sources. And then when I finished those footnotes, I converted them to endnotes. So it's those two things really. It's like having long running documents where I can pull stuff from as I'm writing, and then using footnotes to kind of keep track of everything. And I think did a pretty good job of staying organized. It's just a lot of reading. I mean, I haven't read like a real book just started like reading real books again. Books I actually wanted to read, right? Because every time I've had free opportunity, I was reading for these. It took me 5 years to finish my book. For those 5 years, almost every time I had a moment of free reading, I was reading some history book about TVA or some deposition or some transcript. So it's been nice to read beautifully written books again, not documents. So that's kind of how I did it, and I wrote out of order, totally out of order, which maybe was a mistake. But but in my mind, I was like, I'm just gonna write the things I'm most excited to write first, and trust and like give those the space and the attention I need, and trust that the reader will also find those sections the most compelling. So I don't give too much away, but there's right before the trial, there's this fiasco that happens to the attorneys that threatens to derail their whole case. Right, it's a near catastrophe, something that happens to their office. I won't go too much in detail, but that was to me was like a very compelling scene. I guess you call it like a set piece scene if you were writing a movie. So I think it's what the Hollywood folks call it. So like this is a very very compelling moment. I'm just gonna write this first because I think it's fun. And that's kind of what I did. I did the whole book. I think the next scene. I had the 7,000 word magazine's minstrel story about the case. So I had like the basic structure, I guess, of the book. But from there, yeah, I was just picking scenes like this is compelling, then weaving them together with exposition, and that's kind of how I did it, and just moving pieces around to make it fit, and trying not to be repetitive, and trying to keep the good balance between scenes and exposition. What I realize kind of works best is if you do big, and at least for me, you do big. I did some big sweeping chapters or sections, I guess, of exposition. Or like I did a big history of the Tennessee Valley Authority that runs maybe not big history, it runs 6 or 7 pages. I think it works well to go from these big sweeping overviews to really tight specific scenes. I found myself, I think it's easy to kind of plot along in middle ground where you're not exactly in scene. You're kind of in scene. How do I say this? There's like this awkward middle ground I found myself getting stuck in where I was kind of in scene, but kind of not. It's like summarizing things, but nothing was really happening. I feel like the zooming in and zooming back out is really effective for nonfiction books. Zoom into a specific moment, zoom back out, give a big sweeping overview, history or whatever it is, and or character exposition or whatever it is, and then zoom back into a specific scene. That's why I try to think about that a lot, just to help with pacing and to help with, I don't know, not being boring, right? I just, at the end of the day, I just want to be boring. So I tried to do whatever I could not to be boring while also conveying what at times can be pretty dense information.
How did you deal with, the inevitable dark nights of the soul when it came to writing the book or even reporting the book?
I didn't have what do you mean dark nights of the soul? Like, is this thing going to be any good?
Yeah. And, well, anything that gave you just anxiety. I have things that wake me up at 3 a.m. I'm like, fuck. And so for you that is different for every person. So I imagine that there might have been moments of doubt or just nerves or anxiety around the project. And if you handled that, if that experience you had that experience, how did that manifest?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I had 2 kids. I had 2 children while I was reporting and writing this. I did not have much spare time to think about these feelings of. I mean, I did doubt, but I was also just so under the gun, and life was so. I was unemployed for a year. I had 1 kid in 2019 when I started reporting. Then I had another kid another beautiful daughter in 2022 as I was trying to finish my first draft for Knopf. I mean, I treated every spare moment as a gift that I got to sit down and write. I did not. Finishing was the goal above all. I guess if I did doubt anything, I wanted my prose to sparkle and to be readable. I worried about, I would listen to Robert Caro interviews. Robert Caro with The Power Broker and all these big ass LBJ books, right?
Yeah.
I would hear what he would do to report. He spent years on each of his books, and I think, okay, am I channeling my inner Robert Caro today? I want to be Robert Caro, and just in the sense of like digging deeper than anyone else.
Yeah. Have I turned every page?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Have I found that transcript that's really, or that document that's really gonna like make this book just a little better than it would have been otherwise, or a lot better maybe than it would have been otherwise. So I worried about not being as thorough as I could have been. But all the reviews of the Times review, they called me a maximalist. So maybe I actually put too much stuff in. Maybe I should have pulled back here and there. And they've complimented my reporting, so maybe I could. I don't know.
Isn't that like the best thing that you can read? It's like, a reader reading the review is not going to care about that, but you as a reporter seeing like someone saying like, complimenting the reporting, it's like, yes, like that's the stuff.
Well, I wish they would. Yeah. As a reporter, I'm like, okay, that's good. I guess I got the whole story in there. Yeah, I wish it would have maybe complimented my stylish prose or whatnot, because I feel like I tried to really tell. I really tried to have some nice sentences there, at least some vivid, memorable images or scenes or what have you. But I'll take maximalist. I guess that's pretty good.
Well, in terms of good writing, just of the many passages I highlighted, this one from early in the book, you how you describe the disaster itself. You write, then shortly before 1 o'clock, the north section of the coal ash dike suddenly and almost wholly collapsed. When it did, more than 1 billion gallons of coal ash slurry, about 1,500 times the volume of the liquid that flows over Niagara Falls each second, broke forth. A black wave, at least 50 feet high, rushed northward, with the power and violence of water punching through a dam, which that's compelling and very kinetic. And so I can commend your writing on this in this book and that little passage right there.
Well, next time the New York Times reviews my book, I'm going to suggest that you do it instead of thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. Yeah, I wanted to. I'm not pretend. I'm gonna pretend like the most stylish writer, but I tried to have some style. I kind of back to editing. I think one thing that editing has made me a little too conservative with my prose, and not as voicey and stylish as I maybe I would be otherwise. But it's kind of hard to untrain my brain that way. Anyways, so it goes.
Yeah, that is tough. On the one, when you have the editor hat on and you're trying to coach the best possible story out of people and not make the prose distracting, then it's hard to then give yourself license and agency to then let it loose as a writer, because you can't totally divorce the two skill sets.
Exactly. You said it perfect. That's what I struggle with. So I really had to think, like, with specific passages, I would say, like, okay, I'm gonna make this as beautiful as I can. I would really try to slow down and have interesting rhythms or interesting good alliteration or what have you. So there was some stylish, I guess, flourishes to the prose. So it was not just I did not want to read just like a boring newspaper account of a disaster or of a lawsuit. So.
Well, yeah. Well, Jared, this was a great conversation just on just the mechanics of this kind of work, and and the book it is a gripping read, and to me it struck me as in the same vein of Harr's Civil Action. I read that 15 years ago or so, and it slots alongside that one perfectly and belongs in that class. So I'm just happy that we were in touch, that I got a chance to read this amazing book and celebrate it with you here on the show. So just thanks for making the time, and thanks for the work.
Yeah, well, dream come true. You've had many of my my heroes on this podcast. So this is very, very neat.
Sweet. Awesome. Thanks to Jared for coming on the show, and for Jessica Camille Aguirre for putting us in touch. She was on episode 401, talking about an Atavist story she wrote, and she put us in touch, and that's how this happened. Thanks to the Power of Narrative Conference as well for promotional support. Don't be shy about going to combeyond.bu.edu. Use that promo code CNF15 at checkout. Save 15%. It will some good burrito money, or buy some books from the people who are there, or pre-order books. Speaking of that, you could pre-order The Frontrunner. Link in the show notes. Pre-orders are sadly the name of the game, and if you've been on this journey with me for the past 2 years or so, this is your chance to get in on that action. If you pre-order 5 or more for your book club or your reading group, I'll make sure to join you for our virtual meetup. It's the least I could do for you, spending hundreds of dollars on a few books. Send that receipt my way, and we'll get it on the calendar. We'll figure something out. Pinky swear. I had a way less savory parting shot about something and someone that bugged the hell out of me that I saw online today, but I decided in the off chance that they hear this, but let's be real, they won't. But I just don't want to chance it. So instead, I wanted to talk about this notion of being able to stay in the game. You know, I'm 20 years into this weird career path and 14 years between books, dozen years into this podcast. Some people have commented on my ability to grind it out and endure the perseverance of it all. And usually with the twinge of like, wow, I can't believe you haven't quit yet. This is kind of sad. In fact, I tried quitting and it didn't stick. I've had so many menial day jobs over the last 15 years or so. Even like since my last staff reporter job, fired from it from getting mouthy with the publisher. His name was Sullivan, and fuck that guy. Seriously, fuck that guy. But what really kept me in the game was a dogged dedication to this podcast and this podcast community, and more so my wife bringing in a steady paycheck, her bringing in the health insurance, and us not having children. Like, that's pretty much the only reason that I haven't pivoted to something, let's just say, not what I'm doing now. It's the only reason. The podcast makes $600 a year from generous patrons, but that's 12 months, 50 some odd episodes. You do the math. But sticking with the podcast led to a $150,000 book advance, of which I've received, after commissions and taxes, $36,000 nearly 2 years ago. And then I paid this year about $8,000 of estimated taxes on no income. So you do the math. But I'm able to stay in the game to achieve this dream only because of my wife's job, which is killing her. I deserve absolutely, and I mean this, like, zero credit. I got lucky. I wonder how many talented people are out there who aren't up to their neck in privilege, who've just had to give up for logistics. Anyway, kind of a short parting shot, but I'm just thinking about those people and how I wish they weren't ripped from the game, And yet I've been able to play it, and still am playing it. For how long, I don't know, but at least I'm in it for now. So stay wild, CNFers. Stay in the game, and if you can do, interview. See ya.